Today we're going to talk about how Republicans have squandered their House majority over the last 2 years and how that'll inform what they do if they win out in November. And I have 2 interviews this week. I interview Pod Save America co-host John Lovett about how to approach the issue of young people and progressives who are upset with Biden about what's at stake in November's election. And I'm joined by Debbie Powell, who's running for the U.S. Senate in Florida against Rick Scott, to discuss the bombshell state Supreme Court ruling, both allowing a 6-week abortion ban to take effect and allowing the question of codifying abortion rights to appear on the ballot in November. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. So as we head toward November, this will be the first election where we don't have to just listen to politicians make empty promises, nebulous promises about what they would do in office, because we have the fortune, or misfortune, of being able to simply look at what they did when they were president. And so I thought that a comparison would be helpful here, because we've obviously got Joe Biden in the White House while we have Republicans controlling the House, and we have a Trump presidency to look back at. So remember, last cycle, before Republicans took control of the House, what did they promise that they would spend their time on? Inflation and gas prices. Since they've taken control, they've not spent a single solitary minute on inflation or gas prices. But they have opted to squander 15 straight months on an impeachment effort against Joe Biden that was so disastrous they had to abandon it mid-probe. There's also the fact that it was never actually intended to uncover any evidence of wrongdoing by Biden, but rather existed solely to give the optics that Biden had done something wrong. In fact, it was so clear that Republicans never actually intended to impeach him, because there was such a void of actual evidence, that Jared Moskowitz literally offered to be the first vote for impeachment, and still, not a single Republican would second the motion. Like, think about that for a second. A Democrat was like, you want to impeach him? You want to just get this thing over with already? Fine, I'll start the vote. I vote to move forward with an impeachment. And 0 Republicans would actually dare second the motion, because this whole thing was always based on nothing and always had no legitimate support, and that moving forward with an actual vote would expose all of that. But still, they spent 15 months on that. And what else did they do during that time? They did what they always do and railed against the border. And so Democrats, thinking naively that Republicans actually wanted to fix something that they were saying they wanted to fix, got Chris Murphy and Kyrsten Sinema and conservative Republican James Lankford into a room together and negotiated the most conservative border bill that they could so that it would be palatable for Republicans. It was a border bill with no comprehensive immigration reform, just border security, exactly what they'd claimed for decades that they wanted. And what do Republicans do with their own bill about a problem that they themselves claimed was the root of all evil in America? They killed it, because they knew that it was more potent as an issue to complain about than something actually worth fixing. And so that bill died. James Lankford even admitted on the Senate floor that he was threatened by a prominent conservative mouthpiece that if his bill passed and Republicans lost the issue of the border ahead of the election, that Lankford's life would become a living hell. That is how committed they are to actually solving the border crisis. All the while, we've got Trump out here promising a retribution tour if he's in the White House. He's vowed to enact a nationwide ban on abortion. His party is all over the place promising to cut earned benefits like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. He's taken over the RNC so that he can redirect funds to his legal defenses in any of his 4 prosecutions and 91 criminal charges. He cannot stop claiming that Barack Obama is still the president. If you can point me to which part of that is beneficial to Americans or popular or even coherent, I'm all ears. Meanwhile, because the contrast here is important, look what the Democrats have been able to accomplish with just their short time in office. 15 million jobs, 26 straight months of sub 4% unemployment, a record high stock market, inflation is completely flat, wages are rising, they passed the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the PACT Act, the Gun Safety Law, they codified marriage equality at the federal level, they canceled almost $150 billion in student loan debt for 4 million borrowers. They brought insulin down to $35 a month. Just this week, they capped asthma inhalers at $35 a month. These are things that actually impact regular people, not freeing the fucking January 6th prisoners. Like, what are we even talking about here? So look, those records speak for themselves. One party had the opportunity to work for you, and instead it was working to pass an agenda that appealed solely to far-right Christo-fascist zealots. They want to strip Americans of their reproductive rights. They want to criminalize doctors for performing abortions. They want to ban interstate travel for pregnant women. They want to make sure that rape victims carry their pregnancies to term. That is not freedom. That is the plot of The Handmaid's Tale. And look, none of this is to frame Joe Biden or the Democrats as being perfect. That is not what I'm saying. But this election will be an opportunity for you to convey what you want this country to look like moving forward. One party is promising freedom. The other is looking to take it away. What they've done in the past can absolutely inform that, and it should, but neither side is being shy about what they're offering for the future. Next up are my interviews with John Lovett and Debbie Powell. So I want to start with an issue that I think is more and more worrisome as we head toward November, and that is that there are young people, there are progressives who disapprove of Joe Biden for whatever reason, whether it's inflation, housing, Gaza. How do you approach the issue of framing this as a binary choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump? Trump, who would be objectively worse on all of these issues, and especially the issue of Gaza, with people who right now very adamantly want to punish Joe Biden at the ballot box?
So I think you have to... I actually put the concerns and anger on Israel in a separate category, and I'd actually point you to Bernie Sanders' answer to John on Pod Save America this week, which I thought really captured the way I feel about it anyway, which is Bernie Sanders is unabashed in his criticism of the Biden administration. He is, I think, rightly confused by just how much unwavering support Joe Biden has shown, not to Israel, but to Benjamin Netanyahu, and the moral and human toll, not to mention political toll, that has taken. But the point that Bernie Sanders makes is this is awful. And he is trying to move the Biden administration. There are now senators, even longtime, very staunch defenders of Israel, who have come out in favor of conditioning aid, who have said that there has to be, we have to use America's leverage to push Israel into allowing humanitarian aid and push Israel into a ceasefire. But the point that Sanders makes is this is an awful situation, but electing Donald Trump only makes it worse, only makes it much worse. There's no issue in which Donald Trump isn't worse than Joe Biden, and that is very much true. If you listen to Donald Trump's rhetoric on Israel in just the past couple of weeks, right, it is very much true. So I far be it from me to be claiming that I have the words or sentiments to convince people who are disgusted by what's happening, to convince them that they need to turn out for Joe Biden. I do hope that the Biden administration listens to people like Bernie Sanders and others who are calling for them to use the administration's leverage to change Israel's policies. But I do think the point that Bernie makes there is right. More broadly, especially on domestic policy, Joe Biden has been an extraordinary president. He really has. There are many reasons why he has not achieved a great deal of what he had hoped to achieve on student loans, for example, although they're taking another shot at it. But given the hand that he was dealt, the divisions in the Congress, the economic consequences of a pandemic, a right-wing propaganda apparatus aimed at him, he did as much with the cards he was dealt as any president could. You look at the Inflation Reduction Act as the biggest investment in climate change policy in history. You look at the infrastructure bill and some of the bipartisan things he was able to get through, even with a majority of Republicans just radicalized against governing, against democracy. You look at the way he's wielded administrative power, the way he's tried to empower people who take such a strong line on antitrust. You look at how he has managed to go around a Supreme Court ruling to try to cancel as much student debt as humanly possible. You look at the record, and it is a record that deserves re-election. And whatever concerns people have, whatever disappointments people have, Joe Biden has been a better president than any Republican could have been. He has been a better Democratic president than anyone hoped he has been. He has outperformed what a lot of people's expectations were. He consistently exceeds people's expectations. And he's done it, his great superpower has been to listen and embrace and try to build consensus from the center left all the way to the left. And in doing so, making more progressive positions sound moderate. That is his great superpower. That is an amazing achievement. That means that he's been able to get some things done that I even think a more left-wing president might not have been able to get done.
Just by virtue of it being Joe Biden.
Just by virtue of it being Joe Biden. If he were 10 years younger, this wouldn't even be a question. Of course, he will have deserved re-election on his domestic policy achievements. The age concern is there. It is real. But we all collectively have a choice about whether or not we want someone who is going to fight to make the country better or someone who's going to make it much worse, someone who's going to try to enshrine Roe into law or someone who's going to try to pass a national abortion ban, someone who is going to go after trans people and gender affirming care or someone who's going to try to protect it at the federal level, someone who believes in democracy or someone who doesn't. Voting is not some grand statement of human identity. It is not the defining character trait that proves who you are or what you believe. It is an opportunity to use a lever of power to make the country better or to make the country worse.
What kind of an impact will this draconian 6-week abortion ban have on the women of that state?
Yeah, I'm extremely concerned. This is one of the most extreme bans on abortion, a 6-week abortion ban at a time where most women don't know that they're pregnant, without hardly any exceptions to rape and incest. This is affecting tens of thousands of women, not only here in our state, Brian, but also in the Southeast region that have been using Florida as their last state of resort to make sure that they have access to this critical reproductive health care. This is going to affect our health. It's also going to affect mortality rates, particularly for Black women who will not be able to have access to healthcare. But the good news is that, yes, the Supreme Court actually listened to over 1 million Floridians from all sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, independents, who signed on to make sure that the government doesn't interfere in the decisions that are private for a woman between herself, her family, her doctor, and her faith. And so I'm expecting millions of people to come out in November to vote to make sure that we enshrine abortion access into our state's constitution. But it will mean nothing if they send Rick Scott back to the Senate. Because let me just say, this is a man that agrees, that he said that he would have proudly supported a 6-week abortion ban, is pushing for a national abortion ban, and he will do that if he goes back to the Senate. That is why my race now is more critical than ever.
Well, in terms of the potency of this issue, the people of Florida will have the opportunity to vote on this now in November. Can you talk about what the polling suggests in terms of codifying abortion rights in the state?
Yeah, time and time, I've seen several polls that suggest that close to 70% of Floridians support a woman's access to reproductive health care. And so we believe that with the efforts of the coalition that has been working so hard to make sure that voters are informed, that they understand what's at stake in November, to make sure that they come out and vote for this ballot amendment, that it will pass. And so I'm feeling very optimistic that we will show the country, Brian, that Florida is not who these extremists want people to believe. They don't represent our values. We are an independent state. We're a bright purple state, and we will show everyone in November.
To watch the full interviews with John and Debbie, click the thumbnails right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also listen to the audio version of this episode by clicking that link on the screen. And of course, to see more of my content, the subscribe button's on the screen as well.